Amish schoolhouse shooter, and she's released a new book that's called One Light Still Shines, My Life Beyond the Shadows of the Amish Schoolhouse Shooting. And when I saw that she was going to be our guest, I was like, I can't even fathom, none of us can fathom what she felt when she got that phone call that her husband, and I believe they have children, has shot and killed 5 Amish schoolgirls. They were like, what, between 6 and 10 or something like that? And then 5 were injured. But, you know, all these years later, 7 years later, she's written a book to share with us that journey. And she has 3 love stories that are within her book and just a story of forgiveness, I suppose.
So welcome.
Marie?
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Where do you live, Marie?
I'm in the Lancaster, Pennsylvania area.
Okay, and that's a big Amish community there, right?
Yes, it is.
And there's a lot of Amish in Ohio, too, is that correct?
There are some, in different places throughout the region.
Yeah. Well, tell your book is called One Light Still Shines, as Lauren said earlier. My Life Beyond the Shadow of the Amish Schoolhouse Shooting, published by Zondervan. Why did you decide to write this account?
As I've shared publicly with church groups or women's events, the story of what God has done in my life and how he's brought healing in these past 7 years, people always ask me, are you ever going to write a book? And it was something that I thought a lot about and just spent a lot of time praying about. And as I began to feel the Lord really prompting me 2 years ago to start writing my story, it's not just about me telling the story of what God has done, but it's about shining his hope and his love into the dark places of others' lives so that they too can experience the redemption that only he can bring.
Marie, I can't imagine that day. I mean, can you walk us through it? I know it's painful for you, but what that day was like when the massacre occurred and, why Amish schoolgirls? I mean, we just kind of want to pick your heart on all this.
Sure. I really don't know why Charlie chose that Amish schoolhouse that day. This was our community. It was a place we lived. It was where I had grown up my entire life. The morning of October 2nd, 2006 was just a beautiful, beautiful morning. Nothing could have alluded to what was coming. It was one of those Indian summer type mornings, and we had the windows open, and you could hear the sound of harvesting in the fields nearby. Charlie and I walked the kids down to the bus stop that morning, and, he gave them a kiss and said, I love you, and we just didn't realize that it was a final goodbye until I got his call, and he said, I'm not coming home. And I could tell by the sound of his voice that he was serious and that I would never see him again. But I had no idea what was going to happen. And, I wouldn't have ever guessed that he was capable of hurting someone, much less children.
So he called you on the way to the school?
He called after he had been there, I guess, for some time.
Well, after he had already acted out?
No, I don't quite know where his call came in relation to all of the events, but I believe it was before anyone had been shot.
And you didn't have any idea that he was ready to flip his lid and hurt people?
No, absolutely not. I talked about that a lot with counselors and the police and with family members in the time after, and there just weren't any direct signs that pointed to that. There would be times that I would experience Charlie going through small episodes of depression. We had lost our first child at 26 weeks of pregnancy, and so in the years following, there would be times that he would seem withdrawn about that, but nothing that would have ever alluded to what happened. There weren't any times of him having any anger issues or, there wasn't any major personality changes. There just weren't any signs.
We're talking to Marie Monville, Monville. Marie, along with Cindy Lambert, have co-authored a book about her story. It's called One Light Still Shines. And Marie was married to Charlie, and he was the guy who went into the school and at the Amish school a few years back and killed those girls. And the story, the aftermath of that is what Marie writes about in her book. What's your motivation for, I mean, this is just so hard to talk about, and you wrote a book about it, and you're talking about it on radio. So what is your, maybe you've already answered this, but what is your motivation really for wanting to talk publicly about this?
You know, I think pain is universal. Regardless of our circumstances, we all face periods of pain in our lives and circumstances that are tragic and come upon us suddenly. You know, that unfortunately is very universal. And if this wasn't my life, I wouldn't know how beautiful it is and how redemptive the Lord is and the way that he brings his grace and mercy and love that sustains us in the darkest times. And so my heart is really to just share with others that regardless of the place they found themselves in and whether or not they came there by their own choices or by the choices of someone else, that there is one light that will always shine into that place of darkness and lead us through, and that's the love of God.
You know what I remember most about that situation, Tim? I don't know if you remember, but the Amish people just surrounding you and your children. Didn't that happen? Mm-hmm. They forgave, they were loving, mm-hmm. and I remember that touched my heart. And they talked about it in the news, that instead of these people being angry, I mean, these were their children. 10 children were either killed or murdered. Little girls, innocently, brutally murdered. And this community came around you and the situation, and they said, we forgive you. And I think that you are close to them, aren't you? Or you were when that happened, which was amazing.
You know, that was the community that we grew up in, that I grew up in, that my children were raised in. And, in the very hours following that, I was at my parents' home that afternoon of October 2nd, and there was a group of Amish men that came walking down the street. I could see them as I was standing in my parents' kitchen looking out the window. And I went to my mom and dad and said, what should I do? I know they're coming here. And my dad said, you can just stay inside. I'll go out and talk with them. You know, these were people that we all knew. And so as he went out, I continued to watch from the window. I couldn't hear what they said, but I could see everything. You know, I saw the way they placed their hands upon his shoulder and wrapped their arms around him. And as he came back inside, it took him a few minutes to collect his thoughts. And he said, Marie, they came because they want you to know that they have forgiven Charlie, and they are extending grace and compassion over your family.
Charlie shot himself?
Yes, he did. He took his own life.
So there was no, you've already said, you had no clue. You
right,
said you dealt with
absolutely.
depression, but not anything.
Just bouts, just small bouts of depression throughout the years. And I would encourage him from time to time to talk with someone about that. But, it wasn't anything that kept him from going to work or kept him from engaging, to some degree in our family life. And he refused to talk about it. But it wasn't anything that changed his personality or the way he behaved or would have pointed towards this in any capacity.
Yeah. Well, sometimes Satan just
would have to be
takes over a person even and causes them to do things that they wouldn't otherwise ever think of doing. That's wouldn't be as Maria said, that wasn't the Charlie she knew. Mm-hmm. That would do something like that. Well, Marie, were you aware at the time that this was a national and international story?
I knew that there would be media coverage about it. It wasn't like I watched the news a lot, but I think we all know what happens with the media when there's a story that obviously captivates the attention of the world. So I knew that there would be coverage of this. I did not read the paper or watch the news, in the days
I understand.
Immediately following. Yeah.
Did you stay there or did you move?
We stayed there. We were surrounded by such love and compassion from the community, both the Amish and our other neighbors, people stopping in to say, I just wanted to make sure that you're okay, or here are some cookies, or can I pick something up at the grocery store? How can I help your family? We were so surrounded and loved on and cared for by our community that there just wasn't any thought of leaving. And, as much as, inside you think sometimes I just want to get away from all of this. There really would be no way to get away from it. And so just staying there and dealing with it really, I think, brought a lot of life and healing.
Talking to Marie Monville. Her book is called One Light Still Shines, and it's the subtitle is My Life Beyond the Shadow of the Amish Schoolhouse Shooting. If you're just joining us, Marie's husband, Charlie, was the one who committed the crime and went into the schoolhouse and murdered those girls. And she, is writing about it these years later about how God worked in that situation, and even working today in her life and sharing her story here with others. Marie Monville. Let me ask you this. How has God used this in ministering to others? I mean, how has God used this in your life to minister to other people, I guess?
What have you seen God do out of it?
As I've shared my story, there have been countless people who have come up to talk with me afterwards and have shared some of the places of pain that they've experienced in their own lives, and the way that they feel hope. To know that God is capable of taking the circumstances of my life and all of the broken places and putting them back together. If he can do that for me, it gives them hope that he is also doing that and going to continue to do that in their lives. And even since the release of the book, I've received a lot of encouraging messages through social media and emails, through my website at mariemonville.com, of people who have read the book and have also felt the encouragement of the Lord, or have been able to look at their circumstances in a new way and to feel the love of God in the midst of it. I think sometimes we tend to view God and his love for us based on our circumstances. But what I've found through some of the extreme difficulty of my life is that our circumstances do not prove or disprove God's love for us, but that his love for us is proven by the way that he comes into the valley with us and walks with us on the long road out.
And it says you've received coverage by Nightline, CNN, Piers Morgan. Are you able in these situations to give the glory to God? I mean, or has that been supported, and do you feel comfortable? And because that's pretty amazing, your ministry out of such a tragedy.
For me, I've kind of approached any conversation, regardless of who the conversation's with, in the same way. And so it's, doing this time with you or being on a televised interview, it's really the same way that I would approach it if I was just sitting down to have coffee with someone, who wanted to talk about how God has brought healing and redemption in my life. For me, I know that where I am today wouldn't have been possible without the love and the provision and the redemption of the Lord. And so regardless of where I am, that's the message that I want to share.
Now, y'all had, you and your husband had how many children at the time this happened?
We had 3 children. They were 7, 5, and 18 months old.
Were you the one that had to try to explain to them this situation?
I did. We were just really thankful that we had family members and some counselors surrounding us, and I knew that my kids had to hear the truth from me. They needed to know the truth before they went back to school. I didn't want them to hear things on the playground that they would think, couldn't possibly be true when maybe they would be. We have to have that foundational relationship of trust with our children, and I knew that they didn't need to hear all the details at once. I mean, it was certainly overwhelming for my heart, and to try to understand how a child would be able to process that. And so in talking with counselors, I said, I think this is what I need to tell the kids. I need to tell them that today their dad made some very bad choices, and some people were hurt, and some people died, and he died too. And then continue to unpack the details of that in the the days to come before they went back to school. And that's really what I did. And it was only by the strength of the Lord, because in myself, there was no way that I was capable of having that conversation with them. But it was really in the strength and the grace of the Lord and his encouragement over my heart that this was not the end. this was not the end for our family. I made a choice that afternoon after I had received Charlie's call, was processing what was going on and having the conversation with the police detectives, that, I knew I had a choice to make. I could either choose to believe that God is everything he says that he is in the pages of the Word, and that somehow he was going to rescue our family, or I could choose to believe that we were going down like the fastest sinking ship. And, in that moment of desperation where I knew that there was no way that I was capable of getting through this on my own, I knew that I had nothing to lose by trusting the Lord. And I think that decision that day has ultimately set the course for our lives, and it touched the conversation that I had with my kids where I had to tell them what happened, and it's touched every moment since.
How are they doing today? Because that's 7 years ago. Now they're older. They're teenagers. You're remarried. I mean, do y'all talk about it that much anymore? Do they seem like they're in a really good place with understanding what happened better now because they're teenagers, not little children?